Welcome to the prologue story of the protagonist, a being that has lived and died thousands of times in different forms. He has been a fish swimming in the nearby lake, a bird flying in the open skies, a small ant walking alone in a group, and even a great dinosaur. He has seen the heart of a volcano eruption and the blooming of flowers. He has lived and died millions of years worth of memories, remembering all of his past lives while talking on a big elephant body. But every time he reaches the end of his life, he is killed and consumed by stronger beings. And the only beings he feels hostile towards are humans. Despite death being nothing for him, he still feels hatred towards them. The methods that they use are countless and constantly improving, making countermeasures irrelevant. In the thousands of his lives, he has been killed by them. And even though death was nothing for him, he still felt hatred towards them. But as he approaches the door of death again, he has questions. What kind of being will he be reborn as this time? Why does he have the ability to be reborn? And when will all of this end? He pleads that he doesn't want to be reborn again. And yet, his new life begins anew. The pain of birth crushes his entire body. He is sure he is a mammal this time, and the pain is getting him excited for this life. From his past experiences, more pain means better chances of being at the top of the food chain. And as he escapes from the layer that covered him, he feels the cold air along with the warm touch that opposed the chill surrounding him. But as he opens his eyes, he realizes that he was reborn as a human. The only beings he feels hostile towards. The irony of it all. He has lived thousands of lives, died millions of deaths, and yet, he is reborn as the one being he despises the most. The pain of birth may be great, but the pain of being reborn as a human is greater. And the main story begins about a 6-year-old boy named Jain who lives with his mother Young Shell. Jain is different from other children. He does not speak, he does not show emotions. He narrates his thoughts and observations in his head, but he does not communicate them to anyone else. The doctor then came in with Jain's test results and informed Yangshil that there was nothing physically wrong with Jain. However, when she expressed concerns about Jain's lack of response and communication, the doctor suggested that she take him to see a psychiatrist. Yangshil was outraged at the suggestion and accused the doctor of insinuating that her child was crazy. Jain listened to his mother's anger and couldn't help but think that she was being stubborn and ignorant. He reflected on her difficult life, having lost her family in a war and her husband in another, and how she had to sell vegetables at the local market to make ends meet while caring for him. When they return home, Jain's mother continues to talk to him, even though he doesn't respond. She hopes that he will grow up properly if he hears people speaking politely. Meanwhile, outside, a group of men are chasing another man. When they trip him and he falls to the ground, they accuse him of being a communist. Jain sees them from his perch on an electric pole and decides to use his special abilities to help. As Jain jumped down from the electric pole, he tried to act like a frog. He landed on the ground. The 3 guys who had been chasing the man looked on in disbelief. How did he land from that height and, what is he doing? One of them exclaimed. Jain then tried to act like a cheetah, sprinting towards the guys with impressive speed. They stumbled backwards, unsure of what to do. But then Jain's transformation took a surprising turn. He tried to act like an Argentinosaurus, a huge dinosaur that lived millions of years ago. He punched one of the guys in the face with a strength that belied his small stature, knocking him out in a single blow. As the other 2 guys looked on in shock, Jain stood up straight and stared at the knocked-out body with an intensity that was far beyond his years. Yeah, I was sure, he thought to himself. An ability I never had before. All the beings that I had once lived as. I was born with all of their abilities. Why? I don't know. However, it was clear to me that the end of my long journey this life was my last. You, what the hell are you? One of the guys finally managed to sputter out. Jain took a deep breath and smiled, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. Finally, he thought. I can die. Jain thinks that he finally found a way to end his long journey. Jain was punched in the face by a guy. Then Jain knocked down to the ground. Jain sat down, kneeling on the ground and touching his cheek where he was hit. That hurt. If I don't manifest anything, I'm just like a normal human. However, the guy who punched him was shocked when he tried to punch Jain again and broke his arm instead. Jain used the power of the turtle, and choked the guy on the neck with his small hand while using the power on a chimpanzee. The guy couldn't breathe and was shaking when Jain was going to punch him. However, the communist guy shot Jain on the right side of his tummy, causing him to fall to the ground. Sun was already up and it was morning when Jain woke up to find his whole body shaking. He rolled over and looked at the pinkish sky, wondering if he was going to die. Jain had been hit by a weird thing again. Ugh, I'm so disappointed and frustrated right now. Jain tried to help that idiot communist guy, but he shot him with a gun. I can't believe it, I'm in shock and I feel like all Jain's efforts were for nothing. Jain clearly could feel the pain piercing through his internal organs. Suddenly, he vomited water and felt his wound getting healed. He had used the power of sea cucumber this time. Jain stood up while holding the body part that had been hit by the gun. He couldn't believe that his small body had the ability to heal so quickly. He thought to himself that there was nothing left for him to experience, but the fact that he had survived was interesting. He heard his mother's voice calling out his name, filled with fear and desperation. She was shouting and crying, her voice cracking with emotion as she searched for him from a distance. Jain realized that he could hear her because of his ability, and he saw a small bird nearby. He dashed towards it and ate it, realizing that he could hunt for himself now. He thought that there was no longer any reason for him to be there. However, he remembered his mom saying, "I love you," to him with a smile last night. Jain decided to walk away in the opposite direction from where his mom was shouting. He knew that she would be worried, but he didn't want to go back. For days later, he was walking around dirty and hungry when he fell on the ground. He looked up and saw the sky again, feeling like he was burning all over and his stomach was upset. He realized that food might be the problem, and he thought he was an omnivore. He had eaten a small bird, a snake, and a rabbit raw in the past few days. He wondered what the problem was and thought to himself that even after millions of lives, he had never felt this feeling before. He didn't have any regrets, and he thought that if this was the end, it was okay. Jain suddenly saw his mom, Youngshil, and he felt relieved. He could see on her face that she was so worried about him, despite his dirty appearance. She hugged him so tight while crying so hard. Jain thought to himself that he was hungry and wanted to eat food made by this human. He also noticed that his mom's crying was too loud and wondered how long she was going to cry for. Jain decided that it would be better to make her stop crying and speak human words that he couldn't understand. He said the words that Youngshil always said to him with a smile, "I love you." Contrary to his intentions, Youngshil started crying even harder and hugged him tightly again. The sunset that night was especially beautiful. We're now at the police station, where the idiot communist guy who shot Jain is being interviewed. The police are skeptical when the communist claims that a little kid did this to him. They ask where the kid's body is and why Detective On's body was the only thing at the scene. The communist insists that he shot the kid to save Detective On, who just watches him with a piercing eye. Detective On asks if the police really believe the communist's words and suggests they end the conversation quickly and take care of him. Meanwhile, Young-shil is still afraid that Jain will get lost again, so Young-shil always holds her hand. It's snowing at the school, and when Young-shil finds out that Jain was hit by another kid, she confronts the teacher and the child's mother. "This is how my mom protected me when I was young. Ha 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 ha." She threatens to crush the child's hands and wrists if he touches Jain again. At the bustling market, 2 government officials approached Young-shil, telling her that she couldn't sell her vegetables on the side of the road anymore. Young-shil, who had been selling her produce there since her son was in her stomach, refused to budge. She recounted the tragedies that had befallen her family and how selling her vegetables was the only means of survival for her and her son. Young-shil lay on the ground, shouting at the officials, telling them to kill her instead of taking away her livelihood. Jain watched as his mother constantly fought against the world, unwilling to give up. Time passed, and Jain adjusted to human life. He and Young-shil stood in a field of sunflowers, and Young-shil placed one on her left ear. She beamed at Jain, calling him over to admire her beauty. As they walked hand in hand, Jain questioned why his mother fought so hard. Young-shil replied that she did it to protect him, and Jain couldn't help but feel a rush of emotions toward his mother. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew the sunflower off Young-shil's ear. As they walked back home, Young-shil suggested they have some meat, but Jain couldn't shake off the feeling of impending doom. Unbeknownst to them, Detective On was trailing them, and he picked up the sunflower that had flown away. He glared at Jain with a sinister look, calling him a monster. The law of survival of the fittest applies to every living being in the world. Some creatures die so that others may live, and this is a fact that all beings understand. However, there are some deaths that are difficult to comprehend, such as those that occur for the sake of innovation, decoration, or enjoyment. Jain, already 12-year-old, has finally gotten used to human society after years of living as animals for many times. But even as he walks along the river looking for shells, he can see the destruction around him. The neighborhood has changed, and the roads are straighter, but the buildings are taller, and factories are spewing out thick smoke and dirty water. It's enough to make anyone sick, and unfortunately, Jain's mother is bedridden right now. Jain returns home Young-shil, sick in bed. He remembers a time when he refused to eat a squid, and his mother had chastised him for wasting good food. Jain regrets not stopping his mother from eating it because it may have made her ill. While at the market, Jain encounters Detective On, the guy that's spying him from afar, who appears to know that Jain is not human. The detective's men arrest Jain, and Detective On threatens to investigate his mother for espionage. Jain becomes angry and creates a small earthquake, causing detective men shocked. Detective On smiled and Jain dashed in and run going to his house. The people who saw it got shocked. Jain reflecting on his power and the fact that humans had underestimated him. He can become anything, and he has the potential to become a disaster. Jain reflecting on the human language and how it has allowed humans to become the center of the world despite their weak constitution. Jain has the ability to understand human language, but it is unclear whether this is a blessing or a curse. He then sees his mother's smiling face, which brings him comfort. As Jain runs home, 2 men they mention that they saw him getting told off by the chief, referring to Detector On, and that it was strange that a 12-year-old was a spy who mobilizes so many to capture him. They speculate that he forced everything with his position. Jain continues running and arrives at his home, where he sees a group of men outside. They are planning to kidnap his mother, who is sick and inside the house. Jain uses his high jump skill to land behind the men, surprising them. The men question Jain, and he nods in response to their question about whether he lives there. They will take Jain and his mother, Youngshil, into custody, and Youngshil is confused and scared. She shouts for help, and the men slap her, causing Jain to feel rage and chills. Suddenly, Jain's face contorts into a dangerous expression, and he snaps, killing all the men with his power. Youngshil is shocked, and Jain is disturbed by what he has done. Detective On and 3 other men arrive on the scene, and On is thrilled that his suspicions about Jain being a monster were correct. Jain considers using his power again but is interrupted by Youngshil, who confesses to killing the men and begs to be taken away instead of her son. Jain is shocked by his mother's actions and remembers the day he asked her why she fights, and she responded that it was to protect him. He holds his chest and shakes as he wonders why she did what she did. Detective On's eyes were filled with boredom as he stared at them, but then he saw Jain crying so hard, and suddenly his expression changed. He readied his revolver, and without any hesitation, he shot Jain's mom in the right leg. It seemed like he had figured out Jain's weakness was his mom, but suddenly, to everyone's surprise, Jain deflected the bullets. Detective On couldn't believe his eyes, and he laughed so hard, thinking that he had it all figured out. He exclaimed, "I knew it. It's the girl. Shoot the girl." The frustration was evident in the words he spoke, and it was clear that he was targeting Jain's mom intentionally. One of Detective On's team members hesitated and saw that they were not resisting and suggested something, but Detective On was quick to shut him down. He said, "Are you fucking idiot? You don't understand the situation. Do you want to be killed like them?" His anger was palpable, and it was evident that he didn't want any interference. The other team member got scared while watching the dead bodies on the floor, and Detective On ordered all of them to shoot and kill them. However, Jain deflected one bullet using his left hand and took the other bullets while using the power of Armadillo. The tension was high, and the emotions were raw as everyone fought for survival. Meanwhile, On is losing his mind and screaming at everyone to keep shooting. Jain grits his teeth and prepares for another round, but suddenly his mother, Youngshil, steps in front of him and takes all the bullets instead. Jain is in shock and starts sobbing, calling out to his mother. As Jain's world crumbles around him, he falls to his knees and sobs uncontrollably. His mother's body lies lifeless in his arms. Suddenly, everything around him fades away, and he finds himself in a white void. His mother appears before him, and despite the fact that she is dead, Jain feels comforted by her presence. Youngshil smiles gently at her son and asks him why he is crying so much now when he didn't cry when he was born. Jain is so overwhelmed with grief and guilt that he can barely speak, and he apologizes profusely for the pain he has caused. But his mother's words soothe him, and she tells him that the fact that he was born as her son is the greatest thing that has ever happened to her. She thanks him for being in her life and embraces him tightly. Back in the prison, On and his team watch as Jain mourns his mother's death. They are completely stunned by the turn of events, and On is at a loss for words. But then, Jain stands up and turns to face On, his eyes filled with rage and determination. He remembers his mother's last words to him, telling him to promise to live, no matter what happens to him. Detective On obsession with Jain. The reason behind this obsession is his pride. As humans, we take pride in our ability to understand the world around us, and we fear the things we cannot understand. Therefore, Detective Ahn wants to end things with Jain. Jain, on the other hand, knows exactly what he wants. He can't coexist with humans because he might hurt or kill them, but his mother's dying words echo in his mind, "Please live." With tears in his eyes, Jain decides to live, no matter what. He runs fast and jumps on the roof of his house, staring down at Detective Ahn and his men. They chase him through a sunflower field. As the sunflower field rustled in the wind, Detective Ahn and his team chased after Jain. They were determined to capture the boy who had caused so much destruction, but they had no idea what they were getting into. Jain stopped running and faced the detective, his eyes blazing with fury. The detective didn't understand why Jain had stopped, and he taunted him, urging him to keep running. "Run." Jain's voice trembled as he explained why he couldn't just run away. "I don't do that back there. Mom would get hurt if I did." His words were filled with fear and desperation. His voice broke as he apologized for the people he had killed before, and for the people he was about to kill now. Everyone must have had a mother too. There must be someone who loves you out there, and someone you love. Just like me. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air, conveying the emotional burden that Jain carried with him. Then Detective Ahn replied, "Wow, for a kid, you talk pretty well." His tone was sarcastic and dismissive, revealing his lack of empathy for Jain's plight. Jain continued, his voice quivering with anger and sadness, "That applies to you too. You humans destroyed and messed up everything without remorse." His words were a cry of frustration and a plea for understanding, conveying the depth of his disillusionment with humanity. He questions why he was born with such powers and concludes that he was born to drive humans to extinction. He uses his powers to create a small earthquake and jumps into the air. He then lands on the ground. The impact was so strong that even the truck beside Detective Ahn flipped over, killing all of Detective Ahn's men, and severely injuring the detective. Detective Ahn believes that Jain needs to die as he is a monster. Jain agrees with him. Jain's voice trembled with anger as he spoke. "You're right. You should have killed me," he said with a hint of resignation. "However, you failed, and in return." His voice grew louder and more intense. "All the humans in this world, every last one of them, shall feel my wrath." And he punches Detective Ahn, causing blood to rain down on them. As the moon rose in the sky, Jain walked with young Shil in his arms, and he started to hear her voice. The words he has heard many times before, and he finally answers, saying, "Me too." Thank you all for watching this video. I hope it was able to touch your heart and make you think about the important themes we explored today. I have to admit, I cried many times while editing this video. It was a labor of love, and I'm grateful to be able to share it with all of you. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. And if you have any comments or thoughts you'd like to share, I'd love to hear them in the comments section below. It's time to say goodbye. Thank you once again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.